Well, thanks again, Florence, for agreeing to be here with me because I am on this mission to contribute to increasing awareness and decreasing stigma around food addiction treatment, food addiction recovery, all of that. So with that being said, I was wondering if you would introduce yourself and kind of give us the Cliff's Notes or Cole's Notes story, your story, because we interviewed you for the Food Junkies podcast. So if anybody wants to hear a longer version, you can definitely go back to that episode. But yeah, if you would just start there for us.
Sure. Okay. Cole's Notes, loud and proud. I'm a sugar addict. I'm a food addict in recovery. Early memories of it, likely multi-generational, came in quite primed to fall in love with and to respond very wonderfully well to refined carbohydrates. In my 20s, I read a book called The Sugar Blues and I got awakened. By that point, I was suicidally depressed. I had blinding migraines. I had been overweight. I had cystic acne. I was a mess. And I was a happy mess. Like I had a good life, Molly. I was in university. I had lots of friends. There was nothing, it wasn't like my life was a mess. My body was falling apart and I did not know why. And I was in and out of doctor's offices and it was a medication after medication. And finally, I read a book that just, oh my God, it's what I'm eating. Like I know that now that sounds absurd. Like everyone knows that there's a connection between diet and disease and food and mood. But back then, like 1988, 87, it wasn't. There was no internet then, right? So I finally had this. I don't care what anybody else is saying. I knew my body was unhappy. I didn't know what to do to get it sorted out. And finally, I was pointed in the right direction. And I've never, ever looked back. Like I've been on this path talking about sugar, researching sugar, obsessing about sugar, trying to break up with sugar for almost 30 years. And I muddled my way through mostly all by myself, hugging the books of Dr. Nancy Appleton. And then later, I found Keith Shepherd's book. And then I found Dr. Kathleen de Maison. And I read all of her books and, and the references in the back of the Sugar Blues. So I was just holding on to these few voices out there in the world that were talking about this, and they kept me company and they kept me moving forward, which is exactly what you're doing right now, is helping others just stay on the path, join us, keep moving forward. It's the right direction to go. And then eventually, when I was around 34, I had been 95% sugar free since my 20s, rare relapses and binges aside. I was making progress, but I was never really completely abstinent or free. I didn't even understand how important full abstinence was for me and my body, because even those little slips, right, it just sort of kept the addiction sort of alive, just enough to be distracting and still undermining, still triggering migraines, still contributing to depression. And when I was about 34, 35, I finally discovered that there's like 12-step programs for this. I was like, what are you kidding me? Like, this is so cool. So I joined that and I weighed and measured every morsel of food for 2 or 3 years, and then I left it. And then I was kind of out in the wilderness on my own for a bit, and then I found rational recovery, and that was just the piece that kind of brought it all together. So I'm a grateful sugar-free, flour-free, whole food woman today, and now sharing Molly's mission to help others discover the benefits and blessings of breaking up with refined carbohydrates.
Will you talk just a little bit about how you got to the point where you wanted to be the Kick Sugar coach and do the summits, and those have started to expand, and there's a podcast. Will you talk a bit about all of that?
Yeah, you know what's really bizarre, Molly, is that how can someone be so obsessed about sugar? I talked about it all the time in my 20s. I used to drape myself across tables with my family. Don't eat it. It's bad. Right? Really annoying. Like the worst possible approach to getting people excited about, not eating sugar, breaking up a sugar. But it started out very evangelical. Then I got very quiet because it just was so. I actually went all the way over to Ireland, got accepted to do my master's on the topic that there might be a link between sugar addiction, and eating disorders in women. That was my thesis that I proposed. They accepted me, those bastards. I got all the way over there, and the committee's like, okay, great. Well, show us your research. What have you got here? It's very intriguing. And I'm like, I'm so onto something. And I was just wild with enthusiasm. And I had these little scraps of pieces of paper and little references from books here and there. And you could see their eyes were like, Oh my God. So they basically came back and said, no, you're not going to do a thesis on that topic, your master's on that topic. There's no evidence to suggest that sugar is harmful, that it's addictive, or that it's implicated in eating disorders. No, that's just that you're not one of the professors said you will not embarrass this institution with this topic. Quote unquote. Right. So I just shut off Florence. Nobody cares about this. Like William Duffy, but he's dead, right? Kathleen de Maison, but she's in America and I was over in Ireland. Anyways, whatever. So I never really thought to do anything in this space, although I kept wanting to do a documentary. I kept thinking, I really want to do a documentary. I want to get this out there. But I didn't really get, I almost got funding. I was a runner up for the most major Canadian grant, the Canada Film Board of Canada. I was a runner up for their national funding award. It got all the way to Banff. Like they almost funded it. And you know what it came down to? So funny, it's a bit of a side, but it was down to two. One of them was a documentary on the role that sugar played in the slave trade and its impact on communities of color. And it was a documentary done about the granddaughter of a Jamaican slave from one of the islands that was making the sugar cane. So they were both on the topic of sugar, but mine was more about sugar and sugar addiction. But that aside, so I was always sort of trying to get something going, but it wasn't until I was sitting on the couch, and I think it was 1995, watching that sugar film by Damon Gameau out of Australia. And I was beside myself with joy because books were starting to get written. I was like, see, people were talking about this. And then, but when that beautiful blockbuster, full on, big budget, music, beautifully done with a celebrity talking about sugar, I thought I have arrived and gone to heaven because this is becoming mainstream now. And it's sexy and it's okay. And it isn't like, oh, now this sugar can't be addictive, Florence. You run along now, right? Like, but he was really, really bringing to the forefront the dangers and the harms of sugar, excess sugar consumption. But what he wasn't talking about was sugar addiction. He didn't even touch it. And about halfway through the film, in that moment when he's asking that poor kid who's been, had Mountain Dew in his bottle, he's had all of his teeth ripped out if he's going to keep drinking Mountain Dew. And I hit the remote and I hit pause and I said to my husband, Sean, duh, of course he's going to keep drinking Mountain Dew. The kid's totally hooked. Like, what a stupid question. Like, doesn't he understand this stuff's addictive for most of us? Certainly some of us, if not most of us. And I said to Sean, you know what? I'm going to do one of those summit things. I'm going to do like those summit, one of those summits. And I'm going to talk about the sugar addiction piece of it. I hired a coach. I went out to my bank. I got a loan to put this on. I got a leave of absence from my job. And I did it, but I had no intention. Like you must think, really, Florence, you're not telling the truth. I had no intention of being a coach. I was already a coach. I'd been coaching for 10 years as a career coach with a coaching company, but it never occurred to me to be a career coach. Sorry, to be a sugar coach. But I did the summit. I interviewed Jack Trimpey. He worked with me. He mentored me. He coached me. He set me free. It was truly unique for me. It was just like, oh my God, something deeply shifted in my world. And then about 6 months later, I said to Jack, do you think anyone's brought this to the sugar addiction space yet? Like, do you think I could teach this in the sugar addiction space? He goes, not as far as I know. He goes, let me help you. So I just did it. I put a Facebook ad, like, anyone addicted to sugar, can I practice on you? And it just got started that way, like really very innocently. But when you look back and you think the shelves and shelves of books that I've got on this topic, I never saw it. But of course, I was going to wind up here at some point.
And then it's expanded. So it was the Kick Sugar Summit, and then it became like you've done one on emotional eating. And like I said, now there's a podcast. So you are just like moving and shaking. You are on a mission. What is that ultimate goal? Is it kind of the same idea? We're going to increase awareness, decrease stigma, or do you have something else in mind?
No, you know what? I've played with the idea of doing a nonprofit. In fact, when I started the summit, I played with the idea of why don't I form a nonprofit, get other individuals that are passionate about this topic. We have a board of directors, it guides the work. But I thought that sounds really slow. And I'm a bit of a quick start and I like to I get ideas and I roll. It's to a fault. And but so it's always been in the back of my mind that I'd love to start a nonprofit called Mothers Against Added Sugars, totally in the spirit of Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And you know, it took them almost 15, 20 years for the legislation to change. I know this is a slow journey, and maybe if I get it started, the next generation can come out and take it the next level. But I will say, in my interview this year in the summit, the Kick Sugar Summit this year, I interviewed Dr. Lustig, and he said that one of the most encouraging things he's heard that gives sort of solid evidence that this is coming along, it's becoming more mainstream. As he said in 2011, I hope I have this right. In 2011, the food corporations that put out these ultra processed foods do surveys. And in their annual survey that year, they asked them, of all the ingredients in our products, which ones are you the most concerned about? And then they listed them: MSG, omega-6 oils, artificial flavors, colors, whatever, right? Sugar was one of them. Only 11% indicated that sugar was a problem. It wasn't on, whatever, 89% of the population's shit list. And so, but he said they did the same survey in 2018, and he basically said, guess what the number was? And I'm like, he's 33%. In 7 years, there was this massive leap. And he said it's a combination of all kinds of things. It's the science pouring in, the media is picking up sugar is addictive, sugar and obesity, sugar and diabetes. The keto movement has been so effective at helping people to get that they need to reduce, potentially, in their case, if they want to be in ketosis, all sort of higher carbohydrate foods, even if they're healthy and whole foods. And that has awakened people to the fact, like, damn, that's hard. I might be addicted too, right? Because you have no idea if you're addicted to sugar or flour unless you've truly, earnestly tried to break up with it. You don't know. You think, oh, I'm not addicted. I'm moderated. I eat it every now and then. Well, great. Well, how about you just go a week without it? Just have fun. Be curious and see what it does for you. And if you can go a week, then you probably aren't addicted. But you know what? By day 3 or 4, most of us are like, what the hell is going on?
That's so true. Clarissa and I just assisted Dr. Westman and Amy Berger in a 10-day no sugar challenge for their Adapt Your Life Academy. And it would be like 1 day, 2 day, and people would be like, I can't do it. Right. And they were just asking them to go no added sugars and to keep their carbohydrate count 150 grams or lower.
Wow.
And people struggled. And I think that it was a big surprise. It was a big surprise to a lot of people. I think you're onto something there, as far as you don't know until you try to stop.
You just cannot know. Don't even talk to me unless you've tried it. Don't tell me you're not addicted till you've ran the experiment, right? And this is what ties in with the stigma of addiction. Most of us are using and abusing refined carbohydrates in food, and partly because it's so palatable, it's so cheap, it's effective at shifting our moods, it's equated with love, all those good reasons. But also because sorry, I've just lost my thread. Oh, but we don't want to really we don't really want to call it a problem. We kind of want to sort of leave this. We don't want to poke that bee's nest, because we don't want to find out that we're addicted to it, because then in the back of our minds, I'm like, oh man, I have to give it up, and I don't want to give it up, and I can't imagine giving it up. Seems impossible. I don't even want to. Or they think, man, I don't want to find out I'm an addict, because addicts are like drug addicts and alcoholics, and those are like the black sheep of the families, right? And that's not who I am. High functioning, very successful, very confident. Like I'm not one of those people, right? And so this feeds back into the stigma, and I'm like, who on earth does not have an addiction in our modern day culture? Who? Garbage.
Right. I mean, try to put down your phone for a day. Right. I don't know many people who can. I agree. I agree. So talk to me then about, because you are, what is known in the industry as a two-hatter. You have a personal story of recovery, but you also then are a professional in this field. And I'm curious to know, what is recovery like for you as a two-hatter? Do you make any special considerations? Do you have certain things that you do every day? What's been instrumental for you to stay on the track that you have been on?
Gosh, well, you know what? I would say that it constantly evolves, and I think we're all evolving. And for a while there, I would have said, "Oh yeah, I'm an abstainer. Like I ripped the band-aid off, no sugar, no flour." And then I think, no, I'm not. I'm still on the harm reduction path. We all are on a harm reduction path. I started with gluten, and I gave that up in my 20s because it was really clearly a trigger for migraines. It took me time, but I phased it out. Same with dairy. I mostly phased that out. It took me years, like 3, 4, 5 years to fully just let it go, right? Rare exceptions aside. And at this point in time, it would be wildly accidental. Sugar took me longer. But then I had to look at grains, right? And then I had to look at, well, what about some of these higher sugary fruits? I've had to break up with nuts, like not completely and not necessarily, but when I feel like they're backdoor sort of ways for me to fall back into using food for comfort or for purposes that have nothing to do with nourishing and nurturing my body, I've had to keep my eyeball on these behaviors, right? I have overeaten. I have a tendency to binge eat on salad. Like, it's not because the food is addictive. I'm a volume eater, right? And so I'm still on my own journey of recovery. I don't know that I'll ever end, but mostly today, I would say that I have decided that for me, abstinence is a tool, and weighing and measuring my food are tools. I used to think in my early days of recovery that getting abstinent and weighing and measuring my meals was all the recovery work I did was just so that I could stay abstinent and I could weigh and measure my food and keep it in healthy portions, not too little and not too much, and that the sort of Goldilocks sweet spot for my body. And I realize now, oh, Florence, honey, no, those are tools of recovery. No, you put your food down. You use abstinence so that you can be peaceful, truly, genuinely peaceful. No cravings. You don't think about food between your meals. Back today, I almost forgot about lunch. I'm like, dang, it's one. Right, I gotta go. Like that's just how it should be, right? The second tool is for me is weighing and measuring. Not everybody has to do that, and they do it different ways. But I'm a volume eater. So for me, it's a tool. I use it so that I can do my recovery work. And my recovery work is why it's the reward of giving up sugar, because that's where you learn to bring in loving kindness. It's where you learn to connect to your body. It's where you learn to separate from, for me, what Jack taught me. And really, Jack and Richard Schwartz, the whole internal family systems work, they were doing it at the same time. The sugar dragon is a part. It's all it is, right? Like you could just see all these overlaps of all of these different sort of recovery tools coming together. But basically, so as a coach, I watch myself evolve and get better at coaching and get better at my own recovery, going deeper, having more insights. There's things I know today about recovery that I couldn't have known 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And I'm sure 5 years from now, I'll still have more insights. It just doesn't end. But I am, so is it wearing two hats? I learn from my clients all the time that there is no one size fits all, and that there has to be wiggle room for many of them as they do their own form of harm reduction. That if I try and bring them into where I've landed after 30 years of working on this issue, some of them will get it, some of them will fail, and I think that's on me as a coach, right? Like I don't know if that's where you're at too. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm just there to support and guide where I can, but not for you to run. Like, you don't need to be living my program. That's for sure. We have to find Florence's program or Molly's, right? Like whatever it is for you. So I love what you said about like learning from the people that we work with too, and knowing that you've had to find your way. What components have gone into that recovery work for you? Just so anybody who's like kind of getting into this, like what sort of things should they look forward to that they're going to need to address? Are we talking
Mm.
boundary work? Are we talking emotion work? What kind of work kind of goes into recovery when you think about what you've done in the last 30 years?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. So for me, I fall firmly into the camp that you got to get your food sorted. I suppose there's people truly, in fact, I might even have a client right now where I might actually say to her, I don't think the food should come first, despite the fact that she's binge eating and terrible suffering, literally has a heart condition and her life is on the line because she has such intense, complex post, traumatic stress disorder. It is so, so real. And that when she puts the food down, she has horrific, nightmarish flashbacks, right? It's really exceptional. And so maybe more trauma recovery work, those tools of learning how to soothe the nervous system so that when you're really triggered, you've got some really solid comfortability with working with your breath. You know how to meditate, you know how to drop into the body and to soothe it, you know how to use your words, you know how to stay connected to the part of you that can heal and nurture you, right? There's those two parts, the true self and the false self, whatever you want to call it, like red dog, blue dog, right? But there's a part of us that knows how to nurture. Is It's our superpower, and it's for me, it's the part that will survive the death of my body, and it's tapped into higher intuition, higher insights, higher powers, other people, and that part can show up and nurture and support me when I'm triggered. Something really big is up. And that is really the journey of recovery, is that we're letting go of the false self, the ego, the survival brain and all of its little personalities and parts and the addiction piece, right? And we learn to land in the true authentic self, which is an observer self that is inspired by intuition and insights. And but the only way you can really tap into that part is to go inside. It's an inside job. And so as you walk the journey of recovery, I made this mistake. I don't think people would make the same mistakes that I made when I first started, because I was kind of on my own. But I thought that if I solved my food problem, my sugar problem, and damn, I was desperate to do it, that all of my other problems would mostly fall away. Now, many did. My depression lifted. I have not had depression come back. My migraines are gone. I haven't had one. They were so infrequent, but I haven't had one for so long. I just think, wow, this is how the rest of the world lives. Like days on end with no blinding migraines. Like, wow, this is great. So lots of things improved. But what it didn't do was heal my own sort of places where I, the places where I live from my false self. So where I'm in fear, where I'm in doubt, where I second guess myself, I still have self-hatred that I'm working through. And I know now that my self-hatred, and this is some of the things that you get to work on in recovery, is that for me, and this is a big insight that I just got from the wonderful work of Vimal Asar, who's on my upcoming summit, actually. And this really comes from the work of Buddhism, but self-hatred, I thought that my way through self-hatred was to learn to appreciate and love and unconditionally accept myself and my life and the whole Byron Katie and CBT stuff, right? But I don't think so anymore. You're not shaking your head. I'd love to know what you think self-hatred is. You tell me, what do you think it is?
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm with you. I don't know that I don't know that those tried and true ways, so to speak, right, quote unquote. I don't know that those are the only way, or right, like I used to think that that was my story too, and now I think there's something else that actually makes more sense for me. So yes, I'm following you.
Okay.
I'm with you.
Oh, well, I'm so curious to know if it's along these lines or not. So Vimalasara, in her book, The 8-Step Recovery, and it's about applying Buddhism principles, which is, by the way, for the record, non-secular. It is not a religion. There are fanaticals about it for sure, but it is fundamentally about how to live life, how to manage pain so that we don't suffer. That, the Buddha will say pain is not optional. If you are alive, if you are in a body, if you are an ant to a human being and everything in between, you are going to experience pain. That is non-negotiable, guarantee. And probably every day has some pain in it, right? But suffering is optional. Suffering is pain plus resistance. And he says that there are 4 ways of resisting pain, and one of them is trying to avoid it. Like, I can't deal with this. That's what addiction is. And he said that's the worst kind of suffering. It's the worst kind of suffering. And what I really, really, really love about, so just to get back, sort of sneak in a little comment about the stigma. That's why there's no stigma with addiction. This is our best effort at trying to bring loving kindness to ourselves. It's just misguided. It's just misguided. And there are better ways. But look at, we've been trying all these years to be good to ourselves. We just didn't know it was in the wrong way, right? Or ways that had these really catastrophic side effects or consequences that took years to kind of really become clear to us, right? And then it takes a few more years to get whew, really courageous enough to go, okay, I'm going to let that go. But I need to trust that there's other things that can step in and do a better job of what I've been wanting to do all these years, which is be good to me, to get myself out of pain. So there's no shame in addiction, and we've all got one. Believe me, we've all gotten. All of us are addictions, maybe rare exceptions aside, but maybe indigenous cultures that haven't been affected by Western civilization, because it's really, really hard on us. But so that whole idea, oh my God, Molly, self-hatred. In her book, she talks about how one of the other ways that we avoid pain is through blaming. And you can lash out at other people, right? Oh, this, everything else around me is wrong. Or you can self-blame. And a form of self-blame is self-hatred. And really what it is self-pity. That you feel really sorry for yourself. And when I feel self-hatred, and I still feel self-hatred, and it's really intense, and I literally hear the words, I hate myself. It's almost always when I am frustrated that I'm in pain, or I haven't got something that I really want. And I think it's because there's this character flaw in me. Like, and I don't mean in the 12 steps ones, like ontological. Like I can't, this is unchangeable. Like this thing about me is so in the way of, it's bringing me pain, or it's blocking me from something I really want. And then I go to this self-pity. I don't know this is happening. I just know it shows up as self-hatred. I hate myself. And so Vimala Sara was saying in her book is that's just you playing helpless. That's you playing victim. That's you playing, I have no power to change this, or I don't want to take responsibility for changing this. I'm just going to play the poor me card because I wasn't born with whatever. Right? I was like, damn, that's good. So the journey. So this is all the wonderful, beautiful stuff that we get to play with and heal and look at and be blown away by these insights. And plus, the very best thing about being an addict in recovery is that we get to hang out with other addicts in recovery. Right?
Yes.
The best.
The best. And I just think about how oftentimes addiction, like you were saying, it does have a stigma, right? We think of like the person who's living under the bridge and is homeless, and the paper bag around the bottle, whatever it might be. And I have clients that come who have been in 12-step programs, or they refer to themselves as like gutter addicts, or something, right? They really conjure this image, and I'm like, oh goodness. And I think about how there have been papers written, David Wiss, Nicole Avena, Mark Gold, Timothy Brewerton, they were on a paper together that basically said our brains are actually, those of us who have this disease of addiction, right? They're actually very sensitive brains that 10,000 years ago, we would have been the ones, right? It's a gift. We would have been the ones that our groups of people, our tribes, or whatever, herds would have said, follow that person for the food, for the water, for the foraging, there's danger, because they're sensitive. That person is extra sensitive to those things. In today's environment, it's too overstimulating. It's too overwhelming. We are not designed for this. And so in so many ways, I see it as a gift. I mean, how many of us have this and show up and we're empathetic and we want to help others, and we would give somebody the shirt off our backs and start, freeze. And I'm not saying that like as a over virtuous, whatever, but just like that is just who we are. And there's something about that does make it special. And so, yeah, I agree, like getting to hang out with others and have these kind of conversations, because we have to be extra self-aware, right? We have to have these insights, and we have to work harder to have this self-growth, this improvement. Otherwise, we fall back into that trap of the overstimulating world. And so, that really brings me into my next question, because you do all these summits, you do get to interview all of these amazing people. Plus you run these programs and you work with clients. And I'm really curious to know, what are your best hopes for food addiction treatment and recovery as we move forward?
Really great question. First of all, I would say that I hope that through our work together and all the other brothers and sisters in the movement, helping people to discover the benefits and blessings of reducing, if not totally eliminating, our consumption of ultra processed foods, is that we are we are a unique bunch, not just because we have a sensitive brains for all those reasons and then some, but because we're in recovery. We are the most interesting to talk to. We're the most quick to own our stuff. We are the ones that are on the cutting edge of interesting ideas. We are the ones that have the potential to be lit up from inside with connection to love and truth, and be guided, and right, like there's just so much life in recovery. And if you want to be out there on Addictville Island, great. There's a lot of partying happening there. And there's a lot of people that think they're happy and they're having good times and they can imagine not, having ice cream but let me tell you, if you walk across the bridge and find your program of recovery, come over to Recovery Island, the partying is different. It looks different. and there's more feeling and there's more sobriety around. Wow, I really need to feel this, and I need to be with this pain instead of running from it and blaming it and lashing out and being in self-pity and all that, the stuff that we medicate with our addictions. But the payoff is so fantastic that when we're in our 70s and 80s, we hope we're just like, I watched a YouTube video of a woman who's 86 who just broke the world's Guinness records for the most number of skydiving or something. And she's 86. Like, she's like, I truly can look you in the eye and tell you, I love my life. I love, love, love my life. And we want to be that at 80, not what almost everyone on Party Island is headed to, some pretty dark ending years, right? And so we're going to put the hard work up front, and we're going to do it together, and we're going to grow together. We're going to celebrate together, and we're going to be happier and healthier longer term together. So addiction, loud and proud, right? I don't say I'm an addict. I say I have an addiction, and I have more than one. And so I have to, I had to disabuse myself of the idea that if I just got abstinent, whew, mission accomplished, and my program's only there to keep me abstinent. Oh my gosh, no. My program, my recovery, all the things I do, one of my tools in that toolbox is abstinence and weighing and measuring. They're just tools. That's not the goal of recovery. Recovery is when we restore our capacity to connect to our higher self, and that we live from that place, and we love and we make decisions from that place. So my hope for the food addiction recovery movement is this, that more and more people will see how many of us are out there doing this and what a cool bunch we are, and they want to join us. The second thing is that if this food culture is going to turn around, this is a pretty bold statement, and I can imagine that this would be annoying to some men, but I honestly believe, and I could be wrong, but I honestly believe if this is going to get turned around, it's going to get turned around by mothers and women, because it's our job to feed our kids. And as women wake up, as mothers wake up and go, what in the hell are they feeding my kid at school? Why is there candy in the classroom? Why is my, baby being fed Jello after, surgery? Like, what's going on in the hospitals? Why are my parents being fed Ensure in the seniors' home? And we are the ones that are going to be in the right positions at the right time to set policies for our particular centers. And they'll probably start small until eventually the politicians will feel courageous enough, because they exist. There's politicians ready to bring in these policies, but they get bashed and hammered and attacked, and they back off because they have to wait for it to be mainstream enough that they could step up and say, hey, we need to bring in some policies around smoking, and all smoking has to go outside. But that non-smoking movement, there were individual bars saying, okay, no smoking inside. They were the one-offs, and they lost business and it hurt them financially, but they did it. And then eventually, when enough of that sort of stuff happens, legislation comes in. So it's got to be a top down and a bottom up. The bottom up is it's going to be women, because we nurture and nourish our families and our communities. We're the teachers, we're the nurses, right? So we're in the forefront of the feeding of our communities, right? And when we waken up, whew, whew, and not only that, but 80% of women struggle with food. 80%. It doesn't even matter if you're on the sugar addiction spectrum or not. Or 80% of women on any given day are on a diet. There is no peace with food for most women. We're all struggling with this. Rare exceptions aside. We're on diets, we're off diets, we're, oh, did I eat too much of this? I don't know what to eat. Like, we're all messed up about food. And women are really getting close to getting sick of it. Let's just get on to Whole Foods. Let's get this crap out of our kids. And then they're going to start putting pressure on policymakers to say, let's get some policies in place that will protect us from false marketing, from unscrupulous food corporations that really, truthfully, if we take a very kind and compassionate approach on it, they're as addicted to sugar and junk food as we are. They're as addicted to the profits as we are as addicted to their products. And it sucks for everybody. So that's my hope.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something. I often talk to clients about voting with their forks, and local farmers markets have started to take WIC and SNAP benefits, or like food stamps. I'm not sure what they are in Canada, but in the US they're typically called SNAP benefits. So you can go to the local in like where I live, we have summer and winter farmer markets, so you can go and get locally produced produce and animal protein, those kinds of things. And so even just starting there, like starting locally, like purchasing on the outside skirts of the restaurant, or the restaurants, the grocery stores, those are really great places to start. But you're right. There's a lot of, I think there's a lot of opportunity for the women to take accountability and responsibility and make these different choices. There's also a lot of pressure then too, right? Because our children are going to schools and they're going to their friends' houses, and the schools aren't feeding them, they're feeding them what the government says to feed them. Now, there is a program where I live, there's a program, there's a school about 25 miles east of me where they have they have gardens right there at the school. And so like they're doing almost like a farm to table kind of program. And so they're eating what they're growing, which I think is phenomenal. Now, if we could just get that, scaled to where it needs to be. But yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of pushback, and
And it is coming. There's lots
it's
of
coming.
schools doing that because women are in those schools. The 80% of teachers are female.
Yeah.
We know this in our heart of
Yep.
hearts. Any woman,
Absolutely.
any mother who's pushing back against this is probably just one of us, and is in that early panic pace of, oh my gosh, I can't imagine living without these pleasures, right? But given time and enough pain, we're slowly going to awaken.
Agreed. I agree. So do you think that food addiction, like the idea of it, is gaining traction? And do you encounter any resistance to it, whether professionally or personally?
Yes, absolutely. It's catching on. It's more and more people try and unhook from it. They realize, dang, this is really hard. This shouldn't be this hard. I could give up broccoli for a week and not, whatever, right? So there's something more going on here with these foods. Yes, I do encounter resistance. In fact, there was an expert in addiction in the United States. I don't even know how I came across this book, but I thought, oh, this is really good. I should get him on my summit. And I invited him and he said yes. And we did like a little fit. He asked if we could connect with me first. I said, sure. So we hopped on, we had a 15-minute conversation. And he did say yes, but he was like, sugar addiction, like addictive? Like, yeah. I said, yeah, processed refined carbohydrates are addictive. Yeah, all the same evidence that it's as addictive as any other processed, and drug like they're more drug like, of course, than foods. And he's like, oh, interesting. And I said, yeah, I think your work really is insightful in the whole bigger picture of addiction. It's just one of many addictions. It's just, doesn't matter if we're talking about alcohol, drugs, meth, whatever. Sugar's just another addiction. And he was like, okay, interesting. And then, you know what, Molly, about 3 days later, he said, I've decided not to be on your summit. Yeah, he said, basically, I can't remember the words, but it was something like, yeah, I don't think sugar's addictive. And you know what, who else said that? And this isn't to out him out because he's on my podcast, but Charles Smith was also like, what, sugar's addictive? And he's a brilliant medical, he's a doctor who was addicted. He wrote a book with a fellow doctor who was also addicted. And the two of them teamed up and they've both moved into addiction medicine and they're practicing in this space. And they're like, he's like, sugar's addictive. So yeah, it's really interesting how you think that it's farther than it is, but at the same time, it's coming. We're heading in the right direction.
Yeah, every day. I think there was just an article this past week where it was like processed refined carbohydrates or processed refined foods or junk food, something contributes to cognitive delays later on in life, or cognitive
Impairment.
dysfunction or whatever, something, right? There was some kind of tagline or headline, and I was like, oh, we're getting there finally. We've been saying this for years. 12-step programs have been saying this for years, right? The brain fog that comes along with it and everything. So I agree. I think that it is gaining traction. And I think the pandemic was helpful in that, believe it or not. I think it was. But yeah, isn't it funny that we still run into resistance? And I say funny, but it's really not. I mean, it makes sense when you think about who pays who and where the money lies and who's training who and who's funding that. And, you know, and in fact, I was just listening to one of your podcast interviews with Dr. Emily August, and you guys were talking about, just this idea of how like moderation has been propped up as the gold standard, or like, this is what we should all be aspiring to. And that abstaining has really become aligned with, well, that's restriction, and that's wrong. And
Dieting.
yes, and so it's like, well, we know who's behind that messaging, so we don't have to necessarily go there, but it makes sense then why we would still be being met with resistance, because it's ingrained. It's, yes, wouldn't it be lovely if we could all moderate? And here's the thing, I can moderate some things, but I can't moderate all things. So if I abstain from certain things, how does that hurt you? And if I spread the message like, hey, this is a thing, and if that happens to you, you're not alone, why is that so bad? Yet we get met with that messaging all the time. And it's different, isn't it? So I just really want to be respectful of your time, and I appreciate that you've taken as much time as you have to be here with me today, Florence. I have one more question for you before we go. What did you need to hear at the beginning of your journey?
Wow. I was just, in fact, just when you were talking about how the message of moderation was touted as that's a sign of recovery. That's what I thought in the early days, that if I could learn to moderate it. So I did therapy, I did supplements, I worked with shamans, I did hypnotherapy. Like I thought my goal was to stop being so obsessive compulsive with sugar, and that if I could recover it and be like a normal eater, that meant I had healed, I was recovered. And so eventually, you kind of figure out, I don't think I can do moderation. Like, I don't even know what moderation is. Is once a month moderate? Like, I think so. Like, who would want to put these foods in our body more than once a month? Like, I don't know, maybe once a year on our birthday. I don't know. What is moderate? Like, it's just such a loose term. It doesn't mean anything. And then eventually, and I did intuitive eating, don't we all? We try it all. And then eventually there's this moment when you realize that even if I had a fairy godmother and she could come along and tap me on the top of my head and make it possible for me to be a normal eater, to moderate, whatever the hell that means, that isn't what my wish would be. There was a moment when my wish was for absolute freedom from it. Like, I want abstinence. I choose abstinence. I'm grateful for abstinence. So if I knew in my early days that I would fall so much more in love with whole foods and the peace of eating on a schedule instead of on the fly and crap, and just like the whole thing, my whole relationship to food was just so disordered. That might have been very helpful for me. And I think that, I don't know, I remember having this conversation with you. You married your high school sweetheart. You never had a major horrible breakup, but I did. His name was Mark, and we dated on and off for 10 years. And Mark was bright, and he was a good guy, and he was good to me, and he was fun. There was nothing wrong with Mark. Mark was a lovely guy. He was a great boyfriend. And it just wasn't all lined up. But we'd break up and I'd miss him and he'd throw rocks at 2 a.m. and, oh, Mark, and we'd get together and it would feel all good. And then something inside me would say, this isn't the one. This isn't quite lined up. And just the same kind of intuition that we have at 2 a.m. or the quiet hours when we're thinking about these foods that we're eating, the licorice and the whatever, the junk. But when we would break up, I would cry so hard, I'd break blood vessels in my eyes because I think, oh, no one's ever gonna, I'll never love anyone like that again. And I'll never be loved like it just, I have no freaking perspective that, oh my God, just let it go. It's not right, doesn't work, it doesn't fit, it's not for you. And it just hold the space and be with that pain is right. The whole Buddhist approach to recovery, just be with it, just cry. It's not going to kill you. It makes you feel alive. And afterwards, there's this joy and this peace. And there's this space for the right guy to come in, right? I am married to a man who is so lovely and such a dear friend. And we just love being kind to each other. And we have so much fun. And I could never have got to that kind of relationship if I hadn't let go of Mark. Like, if I could have known that letting go of the sugar, that what I was letting go of was a way lesser pleasure in terms of the pleasures that we can get from food and the pleasures from life. So I hope that's helpful to somebody.
Oh, yes. I mean, that's helpful to me. I mean, right? Our brains just need to hear that sometimes again and again. Like, it's okay to let go of these things, even if it's not necessarily a bad relationship. Is it helpful? Is it good? Is it getting me where, is it the relationship of my future, or is it of my past? And that you don't even know what awaits you if you can let go of those things that are keeping you anchored. And, yeah, absolutely. So I lied. I do have one more question because I just remembered you have a summit coming up very soon. And I'd like to put this out there before that. And I know it's September 1st through the 8th. Is
Yes.
that true? Okay.
Yep.
So I'm curious to know can we have any sort of sneak peeks? Who should we look forward to on the summit?
Website's up, it's launched, kicksugarsummit.com. We have 30, I think almost 40 doctors this year. Really amazing. Tons and tons of brain power and research and science. And we tried to include, like deliberately tried to find more people talking about the recovery piece, right? Because we got people covered who will talk about the harms that sugar is doing, refined processed foods are doing to our bodies. We talk about the science of sugar addiction, right? That it's real. We have our studies there, Bitten and Dr. Tarman and Dr. Ifland, right? And others. And we've got a few more new people that are talking about the recovery piece, right? Which is really exciting. And our summit, the focus is on helping the world reduce or eliminate its consumption of sugar. There are so many people in my coaching programs that came to my summit who said, I had no idea I was an addict, not a clue. I knew that sugar was probably a problem, and I thought it might be helpful for me to understand that a bit better. But it was only by coming into the summit that they're like, oh my gosh, really? This is an addiction. This could be an addiction. So it's open to anybody and everybody wherever they are on the spectrum. Now, if they've found you, they already know that they're probably on the addiction spectrum, but really it's for anybody who's just starting to look at their relationship to sugar and are curious to know, in what ways is this harming me? How will I benefit by reducing, if not eliminating? And am I on the addiction spectrum? And do I need recovery? And how do I find the right path forward for me?
I love it. And just like every year, I'm looking forward to it. So thank you again so much for doing that. You make it free for the first week, which is amazing. And then you allow people to purchase it and they have access to it for lifetime, right?
Yes.
Oh, and now remind me, can people purchase past summits?
They can. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
can. Although we hold off on that because we kind of have a hard stop. So all of our speakers donate their time. It's entirely free. I have dozens of volunteers. It is a labor of love. It does not make money. I have lost money on most of my summits, especially if you factor in the fact that I took time off work, lost income, right? So it truly is a labor of love. And there's lots of people, including our speakers, that participate. So one of the ways that we can thank our speakers is that they can promote, and they have a little link. And if anyone buys a digital package, they get 50% of the sale. Right. So sometimes it's just a nice way of saying, great, well, here's, $1,000 or 1,500 or whatever. Thank you for being a part of this and for promoting. So when you buy the packages, it really is supporting all the people that team up to make this happen. So it's for a good cause too.
Oh, thank you again so much for doing that. And I love that format that you have for that. That's something different and special. So again, thank you again so much for being here, for helping to increase awareness, decrease stigma, and that you continue to recover out loud so that fewer people have to suffer in silence.
Beautifully put. My pleasure, Molly.